Hey guys, welcome to today's video. I've been recently on the hunt to find great alternatives for React. So during my search for an alternative, I came across a library called Vue.js. So Vue.js is a library that aims to build web applications in a performant and easy way. So let's get started. So here I have a dev container with Node.js and npm installed. So to create a Vue application, I'm going to use my Vue CLI tool. So npm create Vue at latest. So then the name of my project, let's call it Vue tutorial, and then whatever we need. Since I just want to get started, I'm just going to enable TypeScript. To enable TypeScript, I just press the space bar, and then I'm going to go down to enable prettier and ESLint as well. And then to confirm, I just press enter. So what features we need, I don't want any of them, so I press enter to skip. So for example code, since we're just getting started, I don't want example code. So now it's asking us to navigate to the Vue tutorial folder. So I go cd Vue tutorial npm install, and then we wait. Now with everything installed, it's asking us to run npm run format as well. So npm run format. Okay, so far so good. Let's now look at the project directory. So first thing I want to see is my index.html. So just like React, all of your application code or all of your Vue code is going to live within the app element. So according to my script here, or my script tag, my main entry point is the source/main.ts file. And for the main.ts file, we can see that the entry point of my Vue application is app.vue. I'm getting an error here. This is because I need to install my Vue VS Code extension. So I go to extensions, I go to Vue official, and here it is. I click on it. Already I've installed it. Maybe I need to restart VS Code. So yeah, so if you guys want official language support in VS Code, I recommend you guys to install this extension. Okay, so now I've restarted my VS Code instance, and now their error is gone. Okay, so within app.vue, we have the following code. I'll explain a bit to you now. So the template tag is where all of your HTML code will live. Or in other words, this is where you render your items to the browser. The script tag is where your JavaScript or the TypeScript code will live. And furthermore, we also have a style. So of course, style is where your CSS code will live. Furthermore, we also have a scoped attribute. So the scoped attribute means that all of your styles will only be applied within this component. So to run the application, I simply go npm run dev. Okay, so the application has started. I'll just click on it like so. And we now have a running application. Great, let's now move on. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I don't need the components folder because we're going to be creating our own components later on. So then I'll delete it. Same for app.vue. Most of the code we don't need. So I'll remove all of this as well. I'll remove this code, and as well as I'll also remove all of the styles. All right, so let's get started here. So what I can do is within my template, as stated earlier, this is where all of our HTML code will be. So let's create an h1 and do hello with Vue. Nice. So within my application here, let's first try declaring a few variables. I'm going to start with the options API, since it is suited for beginners and for smaller and less complex projects. So within my script here, I'll give myself a few lines, and I'm going to go export default and then a curly bracket like so. And then to declare a variable, I go data. So this is where all of my variables will be, and then return, and then all of my variables. So for example, I'm going to do name, and let's do YouTube. Okay, so I'm getting an error here. This is because Vue by default accepts composition API, but I want to get started with the options API. So here I just remove setup. Later on, of course, we're going to be using the composition API. And then to display my variable here, I remove this, and then two curly braces, and then my variable. So in this case, it's just name. We can even add another sentence. So the value of the name variable is like so. So it's pretty simple so far. We can also declare a few methods. So to declare a function, here I'm gonna go methods, and then for example, let's do an event handler. So a click function for a button. So click me, and then here I can just do console.log button clicked. So to use this function, I go button, and then to register my handler on React, you will have to do something like on click. But since this is Vue, we have to use the at modifier and then our event. So I'm going to do click and then the name of my function. So click me and then click this button. That's it. Since this is a console.log, I'll open the dev tools, go to console. Let's detach. I'll clear this and then click this button. So as you can see, we now have a log within DevTools. Let's now move on. Via the Options API, we can also configure this function to change the value of the name variable. To do so, I can simply go this.name and let's just do you clicked the button. So let me refresh, and then if I click this button, hopefully this works. Nice. So the second part of my tutorial here is to briefly cover directives. So basically, directives are special attributes you can use to make your application a bit more dynamic. So for example, let's start with the VF directive. So the VF directive is for conditional rendering. So what do I mean by that? I'll give you a demo now. So for example, let's say I have a Boolean value. Let's do is visible. Let's set it to false. And we can do an h1 here and v-if. So this is my directive is visible. So this means that if the is visible variable is true, then my h1 tag should be visible. So let's write some text here. The is visible tag is true. So even after refreshing a few times, my h1 tag is not coming up. So if I change it to true, it will appear to the browser. There's also a v-else directive, which basically says that if this condition is not true, the other element should appear. So if I do h1 v-else and then let's do the is visible tag is not true. So even after refreshing, my h1 is still visible because of this condition. So let's change it to false. And yeah, so now since it's visible is false, my v-else h1 is now appearing. There's also another directive called v-else if. So this is basically just like an else if keyword in JavaScript. So for example, let me add a variable called status and let's do out of office and let me change it to v-if. So for example, if my status variable is equals to in office, then the output should be user is present in office. And let's add another h1, so v-else-if. So this is my v-else if directive. So else if my status is equals out of office, user is working from home. Okay, so now it's appearing. And let me change the v-else directive, or let me change the v-else h1 to user has left the company. Okay, so now my v-else if condition is true. Let me change it to something else. So it's in office and now it's changed. Let's set it to literally anything else. User has left and it's coming up here. So far, so good. So there's another directive called vshow. So just like vif, it also performs conditional rendering, but computationally it's a bit cheaper. So this is good for use cases where you wanna frequently hide or unhide stuff from the browser. So to use it, I go h1 v-show and then my condition. So let's do is visible. This text depends on the is visible variable. So is visible is false, that's why it's not coming up. But if I set it to true, I expect it to come up. Nice. Another directive I would like to show you guys is v-for. So this is for looping through arrays. So for example, within my data variable, I can create an array, let's call it people, and then the items within this people array. So for example, let's just do Hussein, let's do Minji, let's do Sana, and then I'll use my directive to render these items. So scrolling down, let's do a ul, so unordered list, and then my list item, so li v-for, so my directive. So basically this is how it works. My first keyword is gonna be person in people. So my source array, which is people, and person, which represents each item within my array. So just like in React, you would need a key. So in Vue, this is not an exception. So key, and then here I'm gonna set my key to person, and then just like before, to render each variable, I just go to brackets and then person. So now it's here. So once again, to explain you this directive, people is my source array and person is each item within this array. If you have a Python background, you can think of this as list generation. Okay, so moving on, if you want, we can even display objects using my v_for directive. So let me change this people array into an array of objects. So for example, here I'm gonna do name and then let's do age 23. Same with Minchi, so name and then my age. So let's do 21. Then for Sana, name and then age 28. So scrolling down, for now it doesn't seem really clean, and now since person is an object, I'm gonna need to deconstruct my person object. So for example, so here my key is not gonna be person, it's gonna be person.name, and what we can do is we can just show the name for now, so person.name, and then to display the age I can do comma aged 2 brackets person.age. Nice, this looks better now. We can also show the index of each item within the array. So to do so, I go person and then I wrap it in brackets and then comma. So the second item here, we can do index. So of course, as the name of this variable suggests, this is the index of each item. So here I can just do item. So here I can just do 2 brackets again and then index. So now my indices or my indexes are now showing up. So another directive which I find really useful is called v-bind. So v-bind is to bind data to an attribute. So for example, let's say you want to use a variable as the value for your attribute. For example, a source URL for your image. So we can do so with the v-bind attribute. So for example, let's say I have an image and then my source. And here I want my image source. So let's declare a variable. So image source. And I just found this image from Google. Oops, it's a syntax error. It's just a colon. And then to pass this variable to my image tag, I just copy it and then let me paste it here. But as you can see, there's an error. So to solve this, I'll just use my v-bind attribute. So it's v-bind and then my source. So basically so now my image is showing up. So basically in simpler words, this directive, it allows developers to bind an HTML attribute to our variables located within JavaScript code. This allows you to change attribute values dynamically. So moving on, there's another directive called v-on. So this is for event handling. So to demonstrate this directive, I'm going to create another variable. Let's do is mouse over. Let's set it to false. So my intention is that if my user hovers over some text or a button, I want another element to show up. So let's do a div. Let's give it a style, background color of blue, and then a message. So hover over me. And then for my directive, it's v-on and then my event. So let's do mouse over. So let's try changing our mouse over variable within this attribute. That's very simple. Let's just do is mouse over. Let's set it to true and let's set another h1 element. Let's do v-show. And the condition is going to be is mouse over, and let's do you are over an element. Okay, so it's there. This is because my is mouse over condition is true, but we want to set it to false if the user is not hovering over this element. So v-on colon mouse leave and then is mouse over. Let's set it to false. So let me refresh the page. So if I do hover over me, my element is now showing up. And if my mouse exits this div, the element disappears from the DOM. So for my second part of this tutorial, I now want to focus on the composition API. So if you're not familiar with the composition API, it's basically a more modern way to write Vue code. This is geared towards writing more complex web applications. So now let's refactor this component to use the composition API. So to use the composition API, I'm just gonna comment all of this. Let's just keep it and then export default. So just like options API. So here's what some of our things are a bit different. So instead of data, it's setup. It's again a function. And then to declare a variable, I can do const name. Let's do YouTube. And then we have const is visible. So here it's true. Then we have const status. User has left, and then const people, so whatever these values are, and then my image source. So thanks to GitHub Copilot, we have autocomplete, and my mouse over variable. It's not let, it's going to be const. So my next step is going to be to make all of my variables usable within HTML. So my next step is going to be to return all of these variables so that my Vue application can use them. So I go return and then all of my variables. So in this case, it's name, it's visible, status, people, my image source, and then my is mouse over variable. We also had a function here, so I just copy it like so, and I'm gonna paste it here. Let me remove the comments. Then I remove this. I need to declare it like a variable, so I go const equals and then an arrow, and then it's not this dot name, it's just gonna be name, and then I'm gonna return this function as well. So click me. Alright, so now if I click it, notice that nothing happens. So of course, you might have seen the issue already. This is because it's const. What if I change it to let? And then if I refresh it, even after clicking this button, nothing really happens. So why is that? Well, by default, variables in Vue are non-reactive. So to make my variables reactive, I'm going to use a function called ref. So if you come from a React background, you can think of it as a use state hook. So anyways, first I would want to import my ref function. So import ref from Vue. And then since I want my name variable, I'll use my ref function. So ref, and then I end it here. So then we still have an error. So it's not going to be name, it's going to be name.value. Let me refresh the page. And if I click this button, hopefully this should work. Great. So we also have our is mouse over variable that was supposed to be reactive. So I'm going to use my ref function as well. So ref, and hopefully if I hover, nice, it's working as well. We have an error, so it's not going to be let. Since we're not reassigning this, let's use const. This is great for code quality. So far, so good. There's another directive called vModel. This is for data binding purposes. So for example, let's say you have a form and you want to synchronize all of your values within this form with the state variables in your Vue application. So for example, let's say I want to add more items to my people array using a form. So to do so, first I create an input. First I'll do a form, and then within that form, I can have a label. So label for, let's do new person, add a new person here, and let's have an input. So input type, let's do text, placeholder, enter name. So we have an input this time, and then I'll create a variable to track the user input. So I'll create one here. So const user input. Since it's going to be reactive, I'm going to do ref, and then let's keep it empty for now. So of course, my next step is going to be to return this. So let's do user input within my return block. So moving on, since I want to bind data within this input form, so I go v-bind, oops, sorry, not v-bind, it's vModel this time, and then the name of my variable. In this case, it was user input, so I'll copy it like so, and then I'll paste it here. Okay, and then I'm going to add a button type submit. Then here I can go add person to list. And here my next step is going to be to handle the form submission. So I create a new function. So const add user is going to be a function. And then, so thanks to GitHub Copilot, we have some code here. Let's just complete this and let's double check. So in this code here, what I want to do is I want to check the user input. So if it's not empty, I want to push items within my people array, and we have an age as well. For now, let's just set it to age 20, and in the end we're setting the input value back to its original value, which was empty. So of course now we need to return it. So add user, and then in the end to register my event handler, I'm going to v-on, then submit, and then the name of my function. So add user. That's it. One more thing I would like to remind you guys that when you submit, so for example, if I click on submit, I expect my page to refresh. So as you can see, my page is refreshing. To prevent this, Vue provides a function called .prevent. So to use it here at the end of submit, I go .prevent. So this time if I refresh and then I click this button, nothing really happens. Let's now test it out. So for example, I do Apple and here it's getting added, and let's add another one. Let's do Samsung. It's getting added again. But we have a problem here. So according to our code, our people array had to be reactive. So to follow Vue conventions, I'm going to change this to ref as well. So ref, and then at the end, I just close it like so. And let's test it again. So Samsung, whoops. So there's an error. It's not people.push, it's people.value.push. And then let me refresh. Let's do Samsung again. Now it works just like before. So one more thing I would want to show you guys is that for some of these directives, we have shorthand notation as well. So for example, for v-on directive, we can just remove this, and instead we can just use the at modifier. Recall this was something that we covered earlier briefly as well. Here I can do at as well, and here as well I can use at, and if I refresh, hopefully it's going to be the same. Yeah, it's the same. And there also exists a shorthand for the v-bind directive as well. So v-bind, we can just remove this like so, and then we can leave the colon as well, and it will still basically work. So another step we can do is we can even configure our list in such a way to remove items from this array. So let me create a function to remove items. First, what I would do is I would create a function called const remove user equals, and then here an arrow function, since it's a function, and then I want to splice my array. So people dot value dot, so my original array dot splice, and then the index of the person that I want to remove. So the index is going to come from the argument, which is of type number. Here I'll just do index comma 1. I have an error here. It's because I have to return this. So return user. Oops, it's not return user, it's remove user. And then to use this function within my v-for directive, I can create a button, and then to use this function, I'll go to my list item, and then here I can create a button. So button, and then v-on click. It's not on click, it's just click, or let's just use the shorthand directive instead. So at click is remove user, and then my index, or the index of the person I want to remove. So index here, remove user. Let's just refresh, and hopefully this works. Nice, it's working fine. So let me add another person. Let's add another one. Let's add another one again, and I can also remove users if I want. Great, let's now move on. All right, so one more thing I forgot to show you guys is that there is a way that we can also remove some of the boilerplate. For example, we have the setup and this export default keywords, and we also have this return keyword. To remove this, we can simply go to this tag, and then we can just do setup. So we have a series of errors. I'll just remove it like so. We can remove this as well, and we can also remove this return block as well. Okay, so here I have an error. This is because the string expects something like a union or an enum, but this is really easy to fix. So for now, I'll just ignore it. Let's now move on to creating external components for my Vue application. This is great for use cases where you want modularity in your application. So here I'll create another folder within my source directory. Let's call it components. So within my components, I want a custom component to display all of my items within my people array. So within components, let's just call it people view.view, and let's do script again. Setup, it expects the language. So language, let's set it to TS, and then my template, let's do an H1. This is where the people list will be rendered. And then to use this component, I'll go to app.view. So first I would have to import it like so. Say import people view. And then to use this component, let's go around here, and then it's basically the same as React. So people view, that's it. So as you can see, my custom component is now being rendered. So within my custom component, let's first try displaying a simple prop. For demonstration purposes, I'll try to display only a string. So to declare props within a Vue application is nearly identical to that of a React application. So first I would have to do an interface. Let's do person props, not person props, let's do people props, and let's do a string. So I'll just do title of type string, and then define props. So my generic people props like so, and then I would have to import this function. So import define props from Vue. That's it. For now, let's just make this optional. And then to display this prop, I can simply go another h1, or let's just remove this. I'll just display it in the same h1. I'll remove this like so. So sample title, 2 brackets, and then title. So for now, my title is undefined. So I'll go back to app.vue. Let's declare a title. So title and then equals to. So let's just give it a demo value. So sample value, and let's refresh. As you can see, our code works. Let's try binding this to a variable. So it's basically the same as the v-bind directive. I'm going to use the shorthand. So title and then the name of my variable. Here, let's just do name. Cool. Let's now move on. We can even declare default values of our props. To do so, what I can do is I'll do with defaults. So there's a with defaults function. So my first parameter is going to be the actual props and then the default values of those props. The second parameter is the object. So since I have a title here, I'm going to do title and then no title provided. And then I'm going to go to app.vue. Let's try removing this and hopefully I should see my default title show up. I remove this and then save. So now I have my no title provided message. So my original intention with this people view custom component was to display my list of items within an array. So what I'm going to do here is I'll remove this title prop. Let's add the people prop and it's going to be an array. So the first item within this array is going to be a string and the field name is going to be name. And the second field is going to be age of type number. And let's make it optional as well. So now there's no title anymore. I'll just remove this like so. And then people, let's just do an empty array for now. So notice here we have an error. This is because for non-primitive types, so for example, objects or arrays, we have to declare a function. To do so, I'll just go 2 brackets and then the arrow. And then as fallback values, let's just do name as default user and give it an age of 0. That's it. What's even better is we can even allow for empty arrays. So I remove the square bracket here and I remove the square bracket here as well. And then I'll add a square bracket here instead. And then I'll remove this object and then I'll go to app.vue. So I'll copy this code here or I'll cut this code here and then I'll paste it like so. If I have an error with the remove user function, I'll just remove it. For now, we don't need it. And then I'll go to app.vue to pass in my people array. So again, a v-bind directive and then people equals people. Great. As you can see, it now works just fine. Let's try adding an item. So I'll do Apple again, Samsung once again. So it's still working. However, to remove items from this array, there are certain techniques that I won't be covering today. So we have another function within Vue called computed. So essentially a computed function returns a value based on other values. If you come from a React background, you can think of it as a use effect hook with certain states within the dependency array. Anyways, here within my application, what I can do is I can use a computed variable to check if my people array is empty. So let's do so now. So const is empty, or a better way is to say is people empty and then computed. So it accepts a callback, 2 brackets, an arrow, a curly brace, and then return. So I want to check if my people array or if the prop that I received was empty. So basically I want to check if my length of the people prop was empty. So I'll go people dot length is equal to 0, but here we have an error. So to access my props, what I can do is I can assign a variable to my props. So here I'm going to go const props equals to with defaults and then so on and so forth, and then props dot people dot length. So now I have to fix my code. So import computed and with defaults from Vue. And then I can wrap this element within a div tag. So div, I remove this and then I put it here like so. And then I can use my v-if directive to use this computed function. So v-if, so is people empty, or if it's not empty, then I want to display this list. Otherwise, if it's not empty, so v-else, we can just do an h1, no people to display. All right, so after refreshing my page, let's go back to app.vue. So for now, my people array has items in it. So as a demo, I can just remove items like so. Nice. As you can see, I now have a message telling me that my length of my prop is empty. So there's another function called reactive. It's basically just like ref in the sense where you want to store information, but the only difference is that reactive is used for non-primitive types. For example, objects and arrays. By default, when it comes to objects and arrays, it's completely okay to use ref, but Vue recommends you to use reactive instead. So to use reactive, first I would need to import it like so. So import reactive, and then here I'm going to use reactive as well. So scrolling down, it's not people.value anymore, it's just people.push, and same here as well. And yeah, so let's refresh, and it's still there. And then it's a test. I'll remove this like so. So as you can see, our code still works. So we have an error here. It's mostly because of TypeScript. So I would need to declare a generic. So name, string, and then age, number. And since it's an array, I'll add a pair of square brackets. That's it. Let me refresh, and let's add an item. So item and item 2. So that's it for today. In this video, you guys learned the basics of Vue and how to get started with the Vue library. If you guys have any questions, let me know within the comment section below. Till then, bye bye.